Hi, everyone. A quick heads up, we will be starting this webinar in 5 minutes. Well, hello all, and we would like to welcome each and every one of you to our leadership webinar today on managing by freedom within the framework. My name is Monty Sujanani, Director for Robert Walters Philippines, and with me today we have Dr. Thun from Iclif Executive Education Center. So I'd like to start off with a very quick introduction of Robert Walters, and then we'll move on to share why we're all here today. So Robert Walters is a leading global specialist recruitment agency and have been in business for over 35 years. Now we partner with organizations of all shapes and sizes to identify highly skilled mid to senior level professionals within our specializations. Now we span across 31 countries globally, and across Southeast Asia, we are the only international specialist agency with 8 offices across 6 countries, giving us a wide scope of coverage and access to candidates. Now, aside to recruitment, we also provide a range of value-added services, such as providing market insights and information, salary surveys, we publish white papers on trending topics, and of course, putting industry webinars just like this one. So today, Robert Walters is back with our collaboration with Iclif. Now, we have collaborated with Iclif over the years, and we've hosted a series of leadership events across Southeast Asia. We've received tremendous positive feedback from attendees. And I mean, given the current circumstance and climate, we thought it will be a great time to continue this collaboration with a topic that I'm pretty sure most of you will find highly appropriate and relevant for us to discuss. So this takes us to why all of us are here now. We picked this topic as we felt it would be really inspiring to discuss what leadership could look like in times like this. We have physical distancing to flatten the curve has forced most employees to work from home, away from their usual oversight, rules, and processes. And many organizations are now caught unprepared to deal with this sudden shift to an unprecedented degree of freedom for employees. So today, Dr. Thun will explore the management approach on managing by freedom within a framework. Now, throughout this session, you will see a question box. So can I please encourage everyone to feel free to write your questions at any time throughout the session. Towards the end, we will have a Q&A sessions, so we will be answering all those burning questions that you may have. So let's get started. And over to you, Dr. Thun.
Okay, thank you, Monty, for the introduction. And thank you to Robert Walters Group and team for having us here today. Welcome everybody to the webinar. I think this is my title slide, but I think the most important thing in this slide is in fact the background. As you can see, this is the skyline of Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and this is where ASB, or the Asia School of Business, in collaboration with MIT Sloan, is situated. And Iclif, as Monty has mentioned, is the Executive Education Center within this institution. And Malaysia is where I'm speaking to you from today. We'll be talking about managing by freedom within the framework. I have a subtitle here to say that it's management when there's no more business as usual. And I'm planning for about an hour of sharing. So thank you very much for your attention. Well, to get us started, I'd like to explain the focus of today's session by using a case. And this case is called Meet Lisa. Well, Lisa is a young Malaysian manager. Okay, she is on a business trip, right? And she had a meeting at 7:30 a.m. across town in Bangkok, right, with a client CEO. Now, I only picked Bangkok here because Bangkok is well known for its traffic, at least before COVID. Probably not too dissimilar from Jakarta or Manila for that matter. And the reason I needed the traffic here is because, as you can see, if you have a meeting at 7:30, you're gonna have to leave the hotel rather early in order to get there, right? So Lisa, in this case, she chose to skip breakfast. because she couldn't wait, right? And she headed straight to meet the client CEO in order to make sure that she was on time, right? And lo and behold, she was there early. She got there about 20 minutes early. So Lisa decided to grab a bite to eat. She stopped by a coffee shop and picked up a coffee and a bun. She went up to meet the CEO as scheduled. It was a successful meeting, and it concluded, in fact, with a $500,000 USD project for the company. So Lisa was very happy. She got on the plane. She flew back to Malaysia, and upon coming back to the company, she submitted a 15 ringgit claim, or about a 4 USD receipt for coffee and bun for her breakfast. So I'm going to pause here for you to think what the outcome of this submission might be. Okay, well, in this case, the claim was rejected by HR. Lisa could not claim this 4 USD receipt. And the reason was pretty straightforward, because according to policy, the hotel that Lisa had stayed at already included breakfast. So technically, she couldn't claim for the receipt for breakfast separately from that. Okay, I know it's a bit overly simplistic case here, but just to get us started on what are we talking about today by managing by freedom within the framework. Well, I mean, I invite you to look at a few questions here. How do you think Lisa feel, right, when her claim was rejected based on the scenario of this case, right? Who is right? Who is wrong, perhaps, right? And then even what should have been done to mitigate or to remedy this kind of situations from happening. And I know Monty mentioned that we are physically distancing by means of using the webinar, but I don't want that to stop us from interacting. So in a moment, I'm going to, I guess, cold call on a country. You see the country on the list of the spinning wheel here. Okay. In a moment, I'm going to spin this wheel. I'm going to, wherever it lands, I'm going to ask a representative from that country. I know we have hundreds of participants today on this webinar, and just going to ask them to raise their hand and be unmuted and share your thought on this case and perhaps, these 3 questions. So the process is going to go like this. When I spin the wheel and I stopped on the country, right? If you, out of the patriotism in your heart, you want to represent your country, simply tap on the raise your hand button. I think there is a raise your hand button in the GoToWebinar. And then Denzel, who is in the background here, will unmute you so you can come on live, introduce yourself quickly, and then just chat with us on your thoughts. You can choose to answer one of the 3 questions or all the 3 questions, right? The only limitation here is I'm going to try to keep you to 2 minutes. And I'm going to run a clock here because, as we said, we have a limited time, and it's unlike a workshop where we can spend a lot of time dwelling on this. Okay. So right. So we're good at this. Let me spin the wheel and then see where it lands. Oh, okay, that wasn't intentional. All right, okay, well, it landed on Malaysia. So my fellow Malaysians, if you want to represent Malaysia and come online and chat with us a little bit here on your thoughts on the case and perhaps one of the 3 questions here, then please click on raise your hand and Denzel will unmute you. Hello?
Hello?
Hi.
Hi.
Hello, hi.
Hello, hi.
I'm Dina.
I'm Dina.
We're getting a bit of an echo here.
Yeah, I don't know
Maybe
why.
I don't know why.
Let me try to answer. So hopefully you don't hear the echo.
Okay, we're good now.
How does
Yeah,
Lisa feel? Must be awful. Who is right? Who is wrong? I would say HR should have asked question before turn the claim down. That to answer also the number 3. And I wouldn't say HR was wrong because basically the HR was doing it as per the policy. But if the HR has more information, then it should have been done or treated better. Well, to me as HR, that claim should just go approve. Thanks.
okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for chiming in. Okay. Well, the good news is that on this call we're not debating on the outcome of this particular case, but this is only to get us started to think about the fact that situations like this happen in organizations, and it comes down to drawing the line between giving your employees the benefit of the doubt in their decision making, or on the other hand, kind of exercising what Rajiv called the letters of the law and then follow policy. And this is essentially what we're talking about as far as freedom within the framework is concerned. Okay, let me give you a little bit of context about why are we even talking about this today. Now, freedom within the framework is not a new concept. So as shown here, you have examples on the left dating back at least to the 20th century. In this case, where Gordon Bethune, the CEO of Continental Airline, who was responsible for turning around the airline, he essentially burned the employees' handbooks and policy to liberate their decision-making power. Right? And those of us who attended Rajiv's sharing at Robert Walters last year would remember that Rajiv also talked about this, right? Along with examples of companies here shown on the slide, right? That were given in the book Open Source Leadership. So today's topic, it's almost an extension of that theme. Okay, now you didn't have to attend the sessions last year to know what we're talking about now, but it's a bit of an extension because at that point in time we talked about the concept of freedom within the framework, right? And what I was challenged with is how do you turn the concept into something that is real, something that is more towards usable. Okay, and these examples are not unique to Asia either. So even in Asia, the idea of giving people more freedom to operate can be found. Right? This is a Malaysian example. He's a patron of ASP. This is the Employee Provident Fund, or we know here as EPF, right? Who came out on top at the Talent Corp's Life at Work Awards in 2018. Okay? And just to quote Tunku Sagri, the CEO of EPF, right? It's about, in this case, the initiative was about work-life practices, WLPs, that help staff to strike a balance between work and their personal lives. Right? It's a flexible hours at its core. And what Tunku Sagri said was that it's about designing your work to meet the outcomes. Right? And all it takes from senior team is courage and also a lot of trust. Okay. That was before COVID-19. Okay. Now, the concept itself had been discussed at length by the likes of those CEOs that I'd shown you. And the reality is that at the management level, giving freedom, it's a bit hard to put into practice. And now, fortunately or unfortunately, COVID-19 has accelerated the learning curve. As you can see in this picture here, virtually everybody is working in total freedom, right? Or at least a physical one, right? Due to the measures that were taken to combat this pandemic, not only in Malaysia, not only in Asia, but across the globe, right? Now, Iclif at ASB has been running a series of leadership talk on COVID-19, particularly to leadership and management practices. Now, we've gathered some questions that the audience had asked us throughout this series, and I think some of them relate very much to what we're talking about today. Yeah, let me show you some of these questions. Okay, so how do we take care of employee sentiment and balance work priority? Do we have a tip or strategy to monitor your staff working from home? Any feedback on drop in efficiency by working from home? How do we manage emotions if we have to do a workforce entrenchment? Right? How do we measure staff's performance? Right? How should business leaders demonstrate empathy? Right? And lastly, trust is key in implementing WFH or working from home comment. Now, these were questions that came out from the series that we are running. But in all, we can see that many managers and leaders are grappling with working away from their staff. And what is the right balance? How do we even find the right balance? That seems to be the key question here. Okay. So let me go back to Rajiv's quote from the book. Right? He says that unfortunately, many of today's organizations still operate as if it were 1990 by not trusting the employees and imposing strict internal rules, policies, processes, and procedures. And the result is a bureaucracy which is anything but agile and nimble. This came from the book Open Source Leadership. So while there are arguments to be made, and it's not just Rajiv who's making this, there are other thought leaders pieces in Harvard Business Reviews as well that talks about this concept. But the key element still falls around how do you do it, right? How do you, as a manager, right, or as a leader in the management role, how do you do this? How do you balance this trust and freedom? So in short, it is about keeping this delicate balance. Right? It's between giving too much freedom and not enough trust, right? And our way of thinking, along with other work like HBS that I talked about, right? It focuses around the currency of values and purpose that you see in the center piece here. Right? So I think we are thinking that this is the key in determining how do you balance this fulcrum. So just to clarify, okay, values are the principles that give our lives meaning and allowed us to persevere through adversity. And purpose are the goals that we choose to live out our values. Now that's the definitions, okay? Now for me personally, in I guess more layman term, right? I like to think of values as what keeps us up at night. Now, what keeps me up at night, right? There are things that somehow are important to me that especially when violated, it keeps me from putting my brain to sleep. Right? So I stay up at night thinking about it. And then similarly, purpose is what keeps me going each day, trying to do something about living those values. Okay, so those values could be anything from achievement, ambition, challenge, control, even right, creativity, curiosity, empathy, compassion, the list goes on and on. You have a menu of values that are different for different people. Okay? And it's about focusing on the values and purpose in order to balance this delicate fulcrum. Let me move a little bit more practical on this. Right? So here's the first tool to make the concept a bit more real. Okay, so it's comprises of these two circles. Right? It's about decoding the alignment of values and purpose that surround you. So in the yellow circle here, right, you have your values and purpose, and in the red you have the values and purpose of others, right? Be it it's your subordinates, your peers, or your bosses. Okay. So here are a few steps to go through this. The first step is to recognize that the entire thing is your territory. Okay, it's easy to assume that the world evolves around you, around us, right? And that only our values and purpose are what matter. But the reality is that we're dealing with a territory. And upon recognizing that, right, then it takes us to step 2, which is to begin to decipher or to understand our own map. What are our values and what are our purpose? Right? What do we stand for, or what do we dedicate ourselves to do? Third comes the decoding. So now we have to look at other people's values and purpose and trying to understand that in the red circle. Okay, and especially you're trying to avoid doing here what I call the landmines. Okay, it's what happens is when we oftentimes inadvertently we step on other people's values, and sometimes you also learn it the hard way. Okay, so let me give you one personal example on that. Obviously I worked with Rajiv for many years, and when I first joined Iclif, I kind of stepped on this landmine the hard way, which was well, as it turns out, Rajiv's values is about achievement. Okay, so he's an author of multiple books, right? He cherishes the achievement, especially when it's associated with hard-earned work, right? Now, I, on the other hand, has no such value, right? I don't really need to be cherished. I don't really need to be recognized for a certain work. I just enjoy doing them. So this story actually happened when we had a discussion at Iclif in my first year here, and we were talking about how do we promote the other faculty. So I assume that many of us in the room now are working in HR, in people development in one way or another, and you know that with a vendor such as Iclif, we have multiple faculty, multiple facilitator who could be utilized, so to speak, with clients, right? And as with most situations, clients only wanted Rajiv because he was the author of the book, right? We don't want anybody else. So the conversation was around how do we promote the rest of the faculty, myself included, so that we can leverage them more as opposed to leaning on Rajiv to do all the heavy lifting. That was the challenge. And we debated for a couple of hours on this, different ways that we could bring ourselves up. Right? Finally, it dawned on me, right? Something triggered for me. And I thought, well, there's a simpler solution to this. Some of you may be thinking this already, right? And my simple solution was that, well, if it's so hard to raise everybody else's to be at the level of Rajiv, wouldn't it be simpler to just then lower Rajiv, right? To be at the level of everybody else's, right? That way we don't have to worry about one person standing out and the rest falling behind. We'll just slow Rajiv down, right? We'll take his name off of our website. We just don't promote his name per se. We just promote the concept under Iclif. And I said this out loud to the room, okay? And as I think you can probably imagine, we don't have videos, so I can't see your facial expressions here, but usually what I get in a workshop is that, oh no, okay? And the reality is very much like what you're thinking, which is, oh no, because it was within seconds after I made that comment that Rajiv began to, lack of a better term, began to chew into me. Okay, so he was, he was calling me out. He was, he was visibly upset. Right? He was chewing into me in the room. He was chewing into me during recess after we were on break. Right? Even after the meeting was over, in front of the elevator outside the office, he was still going on about why should he lower his accomplishment so that the rest of us can be on equal terms. If you want to be on that term, then you have to work hard and earn it yourself. Okay, so that's sort of my personal story around stepping on landmines, right? And I'm sure that you yourself, right, may not even need my story because you probably have similar stories, if not with your boss, then maybe with other human beings that you have interacted with where you've inadvertently triggered this emotion for stepping on their values and purpose and stepping on their landmines. Okay. So the important step here is that once you recognize the territory, you understand your map, right? And you avoid the landmines. Right? What you want to focus on here is now finding the sweet spot, okay, or the alignment basically between these two circles. That is the area where you can maneuver around, right? And it describes the area where you and those you work with have a commonality, at least from values and purpose point of view. Okay. So now let me move a little bit from theory and show you something in practice. Okay. So here's an example of when you read values and purpose alignment. Okay. So this is what those circles look like, at least in closer to reality. Right. So I was taken from real managers. right? I simply asked them to identify their values, right, and the values of their boss. So plotted here on the left, you see that that's yours. In this case, theirs, their own values and their own values. And on the right here are that of their bosses, at least so they think. Okay. And these are of course plotted also in word clouds. So the bigger the letters, then the higher the priority of those values. Okay. So if you go through the exercises from our previous slide, you'll see that in yellow here, right? So this would be what we could identify that this is our map, right? This is our map. These are the values that are important to us and perhaps not so valued by your boss in this case. Okay. Then if you move to the next step, then you identify the landmines. Okay. So in the red here are the landmines, right? So you see some values here that are the bosses, which are not necessarily yours. Okay. So there are things like impressing people, right, or very procedural. I mean, you may be thinking like, why would anyone have those values, right? But you have to recognize that someone does, and in this case, it might be your bosses. Okay. And then last, but the most important step then is now to identify the sweet spot. Okay, so by focusing on the green here, which are the areas that you can work with more or less, right? Though this is the area that there's an alignment. I should show that amongst the differences, you and your boss does have a few things in common, right? And it's shown here: integrity, right? Achievement. He may have a lot of it, you may have a little, but there's something to work with there. Same thing with empathy, right? So that's what we mean here by alignment. Okay. I know it's a simple exercise, right? But I have used it successfully to help, particularly my coaches, to either earn trust from their boss or to enhance the freedom that they can give to their team members. And we'll get to that in the second part of this session. Okay. So the first thing is learn to recognize the values and purpose, and then learn to look for the alignment of VNP. Now, to make this even more real, let me bring you to another case. Okay, we had meet Lisa earlier, so now let's meet James. Now, James is a bit different from Lisa in the sense that whereas Lisa was a bit of a fictation or recreation of cases, James is actually a real case that happened, particularly at Google. Okay, so in July 2017, James Damore, right, he was a Harvard grad, no less. He was a computer engineer who wrote and shared a memo with his peers at Google. Okay. Now the memo talks about, the title of the memo is "How Bias Clouds Our Thinking About Diversity and Inclusion." Right. But in short, what it does is that he cited references to claim that women, right, are psychologically inferior to men when it comes to tech jobs. Okay, so he cited references to say that men are better at mathematics and science than women, right? And that the 50-50 ratio, that equality of distribution, of gender distribution, is impossible, that Google was striving for. Hence, that was the inherent bias. Well, obviously, as you can see, this memo, as internal as it claimed to be in the open source world, it went external very, very quickly. And soon enough, Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, had to face a decision on what to do with this viral memo. Right? On the one hand, you've got people who are supporting freedom of speech, right, by sharing the memo, and on the other hand, you've got people who are against, who are dead against, the notion that there's a discrimination against female and women in this case. So what do you do if you're Sundar Pichai, or if you're the CEO for that matter? Well, in this case, James was fired, right? And he was fired pretty abruptly. He was fired on 7th August. I put the date here because the memo was written in July. In fact, he was fired 2 days after his memo became public, right? And then it was shared in the public space. So similar to Lisa, I'm asking you to think about how did James feel, right? How do you think James feel, right? Who was right who was wrong, and what should have been done in this case. Okay. All right. Now I know we're not here to solve this case again, so I'm actually really asking for your thought as opposed to what in reality happened. And actually, we do have a little bit of time here to visit our wheel of names again, if you will. Okay. So it's same 3 questions. What did James feel? Who was right? Who was wrong? And what should have been done? And let's see that if this time we can hit another country that's not Malaysia. And same process. If you're from that country, hit raise your hand, and then Denzel would help to unmute you, and we'll hear a little bit from the audience here. Okay, here goes. Oh, Vietnam. Okay. Welcome, Vietnam. Do you have we have somebody from Vietnam who want to raise their hand and just share with us your thought? Again, you can answer all 3 or just one of them. Just keep it like Malaysian did before, under 2 minutes, please. And remember to turn down the volume on your computer so that it doesn't echo.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well. Yes, you are?
I am Vietnam, of course. My name is Thun. Come from a medical company. This is a company in healthcare industry.
Excellent. Okay, please go ahead with your answer. With your thoughts.
So you heard a female voice, so you know what is the decision in your question.
Okay.
Yeah, just chatted, but I will go to the questions. So I think that James will feel kind of unfair, at least, because he thought that the company is allowed for freedom of speaking. And sharing idea why I'm sharing and I have this kind of consequence, or maybe in a positive way after this kind of issue he may learn something. I hope that, but I think that from the beginning James may feel disappointed and be treated unfairly. So the second question is who was right, who was wrong in this situation. I think that James was wrong, at least, because the freedom. But as you all may know, that freedom we also have some principle and some topics like gender or religious is really sensitive topic. And they also mention in any rules of freedom that we do not touch on this kind of area. So I think that what should we do in this case? I think as a big company like Google, they also they should have quite sufficient principle or policy on these kind of things, on how about a freedom of sharing, speaking, and also have some of limitation on this. So it's up to help the CEO handle with it and communication with the organization and also with external. This should be based on the rule and policy of Google also. So
Okay.
this is from my point of view. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much for sharing. Thank you so much. Yes. I mean, again, this case alone, we can this case alone we can talk about it for a while in a workshop setting, right? But I think you begin to see here that right, relating to what we talked about earlier with aligning of values and purpose, right? Now James now essentially what James did in this case is that he stepped on the landmine. Okay, he got fired for exercising too much freedom, right? Perhaps in this case, you may even think that it's a bit of opposite of what Lisa had felt in the or had done in the earlier case. Yeah. Well, in short, this is a debate between freedom of speech and gender diversity, right? But this is my observation and my analysis. So it's not a fact, okay? But to take it with a grain of salt here, right? I believe James was fired for stepping on the value of the CEO. Okay, because when he was fired, he actually, CEO said that he was fired for violating the value of creating an environment where people can flourish and grow. Okay, and my deduction here is that Sundar Pichai is an ethnic minority. Right? He actually came from he moved from India to the United States, and when it comes to freedom within freedom of speech and the choice for giving the people opportunity to grow in a in fairness and with respect, that perhaps might be more important than freedom of speech, at least to Pichai. Okay, either which way, that's my own observation of this. But you can see in this case, James stepped on a landmine. And the first question is that how did James feel? Right? He said it in an interview that was done by The Guardian that he was shocked. Okay? He said I quote here, he definitely didn't think that would explode like it did, and that he lost a lot of sleep and didn't eat much. Okay, so he didn't anticipate for this to happen, but it did because he failed to recognize this and he stepped on the landmine. Okay, all right. Well, thank you for the share. Let me move to the second tool of this talk, which is then how do you manage? Right, now that you know how values and purpose alignment works, right? How do you manage, right? In the context of freedom within the framework, right? And essentially you do it on a backdrop, okay, on like a chessboard, if you will, okay. And it looks a little bit like this. So bear with me. This is going to be a bit theoretical, but hopefully with all the examples that we've used so far, we can begin to see how you would apply this. Okay. So what you do with this is then first you plot this 2x2, if you will, right? So you've got on the x-axis here an alignment of values and purpose. Okay, so and this has to do with the degree of alignment. So you go from left to right. The further right you go, then the more overlap, so to speak, your two circles are. Okay, and then the further to the left you go here, the less overlap those circles are. Yeah, that's the x-axis. If you look at the y-axis, and then you have now the degree of freedom, right? Or if you're working with a superior, then it could be the degree of trust that you're given. And again, it goes from bottom to top, meaning that the further top you go, then the more freedom you have, and then the less freedom you have. Okay. So now, if you correlate these two parameters, the alignment of values and purpose and the degree of freedom, right, then you have 6 zones. Okay, let me explain the 6 zone in a minute, but what I want you to also point out is that within the 6 zones, you have here 3 zones that are labeled green. These are in the green zone, so green band, if you will, that cuts diagonally from bottom left to top right. Okay, and then the zones are distributed along the board like as such. Okay, so if you begin to read this in the context of those parameters, you see that zone 1 talks about when you have a low alignment of values and purpose, and this corresponds to low degree of freedom. Okay, you go to zone 2, then you have a moderate, right, alignment, therefore you have a moderate degree of freedom. And in zone 3, you have a high degree of alignment, therefore a high degree of freedom. Okay, so if you think about those circles that we talked about earlier, right, if you were to superimpose them onto this graph, it would look something like that. Right? If you have a high alignment, then you're up here with a lot of freedom. If a low alignment here, then you have a low degree of freedom. Okay. The interesting part is when you venture out of the green band. Okay, so you have zone 4 here, right, which is too much freedom. Right? So if you read this matrix, you see that it comes about when you have a low alignment of values and purpose, but the person or persons are given a high degree of freedom and trust. Okay, so this is what we say, it's too much freedom, right, outside the green band. And then conversely, on zone 5, then you have the opposite of that, which is somebody who's shown to be in alignment with the values of purpose of the boss, if not of the organization, but yet they're being treated with a low degree of freedom and trust. Okay, this would lead to mistrust or the feeling that the person may have. Okay, and then we also have zone 6, right, which is when the two circles are separated completely, right? And you, in this case, it might be better for the two to be on their own separate success way, and perhaps contact Robert Walters. Anyway, okay, so this is how the distribution of the zones would be, right? And if I were to ask you to think about this, right, you can literally do this exercise with anybody in your team or multiple people in your team, and you begin to have the distribution of where each person is on this chessboard, if you will. And it gives you an idea about how do you move the chess pieces now so that we stay within the green zone, right? And we kind of steer away from the, you know, the 4, 5, and 6 if possible. So for example, if I were to ask you to think about Lisa in our first case, right? When she couldn't claim a $4 or a 15 ringgit tab for breakfast when she was on a business run, okay, where do you think she might place herself in this 6th zone? Right? So I think the I'm not going to ask you physically for an answer here, but I think mentally you are following me here that Lisa might be somewhere here, right? She will be in zone 5, which is feeling that she's, you know, in this case, right? She doesn't even, you know, she has the authority to deal $500,000 USD contract with client CEO, no less, but she doesn't even have the trust to claim a 15 ringgit or a 4 USD receipt based on her judgment that this was a business trip and she should be entitled to. Okay. And I guess by the same token, if you think about James that we just discussed, right? What happened to James? Which zone was James in? Okay. Now you may argue that James here now is kind of on the opposite end of Lisa, which was, you know, James was somebody who had not understood the values of purpose of Google, right? If not of Sundar Pichai, well enough to have exercised that freedom to have written that memo and share that memo. Okay, now again, just to keep in mind, we're talking about management here, not legal, right? Because as a matter of fact, this case is still in court. James has sued Google after he was fired. But from a management point of view, I think we would agree that you know, James has made a misstep here, and if he had gone back in time, he probably would have reevaluated how he would have gone about expressing that opinion. Right. So you can see a little bit here now about how this backdrop can be used in conjunction with the alignment, right? And it now gives you ideas. If you plot 5, 6, 8 of your people on this board, then you can begin to see who sits where and how do you manage them accordingly so that you don't give them too much freedom, and by the same token, you don't give them too little freedom and seed the feeling of mistrust. Okay, so let's do a little exercise. We still have a little bit of time left here. Okay, let's do a little exercise. Okay, now I'm going to engage all of you who are probably be sitting in front of a computer at home, hopefully. Just find a piece of paper or something that you can write with. And then I'm going to walk you through the instruction here, and then I'll ask you to contribute your answer collectively, and then we'll see how we do as a room here. Okay. Okay, so here's what I'm asking you to do, please. Okay. First is I want you to think of one member, right, that whom you're working with. It could be your subordinate, it could be your peer, it could be your boss, right, that you're working with and you're having a difficulty working with, right, during this COVID-19 work from home situation. Okay. Okay, so think about that person. Okay. Next step is now I want you to think about her or his values and purpose. Now, I know it's a big question to throw at you on a 1-hour webinar, but do the best you can. think about them, right? If you want to jot a few down, you may, okay? And now think about your own values and purpose, okay? All right, so think about theirs, think about yours. So essentially I'm asking you to think about the red circle, right? And then to think about the yellow circle here on the top right of the screen. Okay. And the question that I really need an answer from you is on number 4, which is, I need you to decide, at least for the sake of exercise here, how much do you think those two sets overlap, right? It's do in percentage, okay? So you think it's a 10-degree overlap, it's a 40% overlap, if it's a 90% overlap with this person, right? When it compares to your values and purpose. Okay. Now write down that percentage. Okay, whether it's right or wrong, I don't know, and we won't know, but just have something to work with for the purpose of this exercise. Okay, then next, okay, so that would give you the x-axis on that chessboard we covered before. Okay, so now for the y-axis, I'd like you to now think about how much freedom, right, or trust that you have been giving this person, or you've been given by this person. Okay, so if you're choosing your boss or your peer, then it might be the reverse, which is it's how much trust, how much trust am I getting from my boss, from my colleague right now? Or is it if you're working with a subordinate, then it could be how much freedom or how much trust do I have for this person right now? Okay, and then put that in also in percentage, right? Keep in mind that because of COVID-19, that number might be skewed a bit higher because you don't get to see them every day, and you kind of have to rely on them working on their own away from the office and from your supervision. Okay, so by now you should have 2 percentages, right? One for the x-axis that represent the overlap between your yellow and your red circles here, right? For the person that you're having a bit more difficulty working with during work from home, and then you have another number, another percentage for the degree of freedom. Okay, we'll be plotting this together in a minute, but let me complete the walkthrough of this exercise, right? Which is then we're going to match these coordinates to the corresponding zone, okay, on what we just talked about in the previous slide. And the reality is that this is not a quantitative in the strict sense. As you can see, it's a more of a qualitative exercise, right? It's a judgment call. But it's hopefully it's somewhere between the concept of working with freedom, but seeing something in front of you about what we're dealing with when it comes to managing people. And the reality when we're dealing with qualitative is that it's not going to be an answer, but rather the beginning of a conversation. So step 7 here talks about, then we think about how do you improve? How can we optimize the current situation? And step 8 is very important, which is then you have a discussion with the person, right? Perhaps with this this backdrop in front of you both, right? To talk about whether or not should we be talking about giving Lisa more freedom, or should we talk about aligning James to the framework or the values and purpose, in this case at Google. Okay. So the key word here is this is not a mathematical exercise, it is a qualitative exercise, but one that helps us to visualize in order to formulate a meaningful discussion. All right, so let me go to this slide. Okay, so this slide, we're going to, this is how we're going to plot this together, even though we're not together, right? And I'm gonna ask you if you could please, if you have your phone nearby, just scan the QR code here. That should take you to a Slido room, right? A polling room that you'll see multiple choices, right? 6 multiple choices to be exact, that goes from zone 1 through zone 6. Okay, so if you have the percentage, right, that you have written down, just basically find out where that coordinates take you on this plot. So you are, in your 60% alignment, 50% degree of freedom, then you maybe in zone 2, right? If you're, have a low alignment, 20% alignment, but you have a high degree of freedom, you might be in zone 4, right? Something like that. Okay, and then just click on the multiple choices. I'm just curious to see how do we look. Okay, and I'm seeing the live results here, which I will plot for us in a minute on this slide. Okay. All right. Let me run for about a minute or so. Okay, we're at about 50 people now, so I think our end is pretty good. Let me just write down where we are at right now, and then just to show you how this works. Right? Okay, so we have about 30% in zone 2. Okay, we have about 20% in zone 3, and we have about, by this math, right? We have okay, the numbers are moving a bit here, right? So we have 30% here. Okay, we have 6% in zone 5, right? And the rest are somewhere. Okay, so apologize, it's not going to add up to 100 because the numbers are moving as we speak. So continue to vote if you haven't done so, but you can already see that the distributions from us on this webinar is that it's right. We're not sitting in the same zone here, right? And if you look at the screen here, you can see that we have about a third of the population here is that the person is in zone 2, which is a medium degree of alignment and thereby a medium degree of freedom, right? Which is fair enough, right? And you used to have people who are 20% with high alignment, yet 20% of and being given a high degree of freedom, which is great. Okay. You also have a little bit of outlier here, which is about total here about 36%, right? Outside, which is in zone 4, right? And zone 4 here talks about. Let me bring you the slide so you can see the corresponding description. Okay, right. So in zone 4 here, you have the people with given too much freedom, right? Meaning that they don't have an alignment of freedom within the framework, right? And they're being given too much freedom here, and might be the reason why they're creating you a little bit of a headache during working from home, right? Or having been given that much freedom, right? And interestingly, you also have 6% who are saying that the person may have a high degree of alignment, and rather is feeling mistrusted by the management style that's happening during work from home, right? Interestingly, in our discussions with executives, we also see cases like this where, despite us being away from each other, certain bosses become more bossy, if you will. Okay, so we've heard the words micromanagement being voiced by subordinates now. That personally, I thought that term was obsolete. Right? I think most organizations now know better. Most managers now know better to not micromanage their people. Yet, with the advent of COVID and working from home, you begin to see that terms becoming back into play, because sometimes out of sight means that sometimes we take away the freedom when, in this case, they may have rightly earned it. Okay, so this is to give you an idea about what you could do, right, with this backdrop, and then what you could do with trying to put your people there so that you can move them towards the green zone. Okay, so the idea is to be in the green. Okay, ideally, if you can be up here, that's great. That means you can have full delegation, full empowerment. You can trust the decision making. Right? But there's nothing wrong to be in zone 1 either in this particular case, right? It's say you're working with somebody who's new to the organization, still doesn't know, right? It's perfectly fine to kind of rope them in a little bit, give them a low degree of freedom, give them a lot of guidance so that they stay in the green here. The challenges usually often comes when you wander outside of the green zone. All right, I'm being mindful of the time, so unfortunately we're not going to be able to cover it in much detail. If you have any specific questions, by all means, please leave them in the question box, and then Monty and I will see how many of those we can get to at the end. Okay. So the idea here, again, it's about managing by freedom within the framework, and the tools that I've shown you here kind of is an attempt, right, to trying to bring it from the idea or the concept of managing by freedom within the framework to something that it's workable at the managerial, at a management level. Okay, and so let me show you a few examples before I close this off and then hand it back to Monty. Okay, so some examples here. Okay, so remember I talked about EPF. Okay, so I did this little exercise with the people at EPF, and on the topic of of the working the freedom to have a flexibility around their time. Okay, and I did the similar exercise, but I asked them to think about, okay, where do you think their people place when it comes to flexible hours? Okay, and you can see on this, apologize for the manual, this was back when we can still get together and write stuff together. You can see that most people here are up on the top right corner here in the green zone. So essentially people can be trusted to manage their own schedule, right? And they haven't done anything to abuse that power. Okay, there are a few people who are here, right, who had been given a lot of freedom under the policy, the change of policy, but the way to get out of this is either you drop the freedom or you kind of have a conversation and move them into the values and purpose. Okay. Here's another example. Okay, this is one similar to what we just did together to think about problematic employees. Okay, and you can see that it's showing up here on the left side here with an Asian bank, right? Problematic employees analysis. So you can see that they have quite a few who are showing up here in zone 4, which is too much freedom, similar to some of our analyses earlier that we did together today. Okay, so in this case, you know, they were causing problems because they were giving too much freedom with a low degree of VNP alignment. Okay, and lastly, I'm going to show you one personal example as well that you can also do this kind of you know, personally with your kids as well, right? So this is a problematic, right? Problematic children. Okay, so you can see here that I have a son, right? My younger child is he's a son, he's about 11 years old, and he wanted to play, you know, Fortnite. So those of us with children would know that, you know, it's a video game, right? It's a rather, you know, more on the violent side of video game, right? But he wanted to play that. So, you know, his mother and I said, okay, yes, we can, but you have to, you know, have a certain rule, a certain contract, if you will. Okay. So he said, okay, oh, you want a contract? Okay, I'll give you a contract. Okay, so he disappeared for about 15 minutes and he came back with a contract. Okay, this is his work, by the way. Okay, so he wrote this contract. And right, it says Fortnite contract. Okay, so it reads this: must do 20 questions of math, all right, or assignment every day to get Fortnite. Okay, it says to play responsibly on weekends and Friday evening for 30 minutes each day. And he made some rooms for signatures to make sure that the contract is binding, right, including he has his sister pinned here as the witness. So I asked him, okay, the original contract ended here. So I asked him, okay, well, how would we know if you're living up to these values and that you are promising? So he said, okay, fine, right? Then he put this in, said if MAP scores, so MAP score is a standardized score, right? If MAP scores go down, right, or if I become violent, okay, then it's bye-bye Fortnite. So I asked him the final question, which is, well, how do we know if you become violent? Okay, so finally he went back with a final revision, which might be a bit difficult for you to see here, but he put in an asterisk here and say that mom's decision is final. Okay, so if mom says that this is your behavior becoming violent, then it's bye-bye Fortnite. Okay, it's a little bit personal, but you can see that, you know, we can use freedom within the framework not only at work, but you can also use it to shape, you know, the people at home as well, as long as we are working towards aligning those values and purpose. All right, well, I'm at the end of my time here, so just a few takeaways before I pass this back to Monty. Okay, so the concept of what we talked about today, managing by freedom within the framework, talks about the aim to give freedom. Right, and I hope you see that now that giving freedom isn't just going to be pertinent during COVID time. It was around before that. It was the trend, not only in the West, but also in Asia. You see practices of those as well. Right, so we talked about managing by aligning values and purpose, right? Understanding the red circles and the yellow circle, and reading that alignment. Plotting it onto the backdrop, and then keeping people in the green zone, right? You want to be careful of giving too much freedom or giving not enough freedom and creating mistrust, or even worse, separation. And then you're trying to coach people towards the top right corner, which is the point where we can trust the decision making. They may not be right all the time, but at least we can trust that if they're claiming a 15 ringgit tab for breakfast, they did it because it was the right call, it was the business related issue, and we don't have to write a binder of policy in order to enforce it for everybody in the organization. Okay. So with that in mind, Monty, I'm going to hand this back to you and then see if you want to help us with any questions. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Tan. That was really, really insightful. And I hope everyone found that useful. So yeah, I think this is the best time we can proceed to our Q&A session. Now, we've been receiving quite a few questions. So again, guys, please keep that coming. I do apologize in advance if we are unable to go through all the questions, but we're going to try our best. It seems that there are some overlapping topics here, so I'm just going to go through. We'll start with the first question. Dr. Tan, we're talking about understanding values and purpose. How do we know what other people's values are? What's the best way to extract these values and to begin putting people in the right zone?
Okay, if only I have a ringgit every time I get asked that question. But I mean, it is a critical question, hence the frequency that I get asked, right? And if you look through the literature, there are two ways of decoding values, right? One is by assessing, and the other is by observing. So when I say assessing, right, and if you go to a kind of ready-made tools, you see things that are essentially menus of values in one form or another that they will ask you to go through either psychometrically or just by choice, picking out the values that you think are important to you, and then they'll give you a report on what that might be. There are lots of vendors out there that could do that for you. On the other hand, it's also by observing. It's kind of like when I learned about Rajiv's values. I didn't do an assessment for him per se, but I learned that when values come into contact with the world, right, and this is going back a little bit to leadership energy that Rajiv talked about last year, right? They come out, right? When it comes into contact with the world, when people violate your values or you violate somebody else's values, you step on landmines, you're going to see an emotional reaction. And when you see that, that's a good cue to write it down, that perhaps you're stepping on that, and perhaps it gives you a reading into what that value might be. So two ways is by assessing and by observing. Right? Personally, I guess the best way for me personally is to do the combination of both. Right? So you do an assessment to give you an idea about what a value, what a subset of the person's value might be, but you use the observation to be a validation. Right, to validate that you're observing it's rightly, and don't just trust what they pencil into a piece of paper to be it. You have to check for the emotions that come with really having those values. Yes, Monty.
Great. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, Dr. Tan. Great. Moving on to the next question we have here. Do you have any advice for companies that still micromanage their employees during this period? And does this really work in our culture?
Well, again, our culture is a bit difficult to pinpoint, right? Because everybody has different culture. But what I try to do in this webinar, at least to show you some examples of an Asian culture, which might be our common underlining theme here. That yes, freedom does work, and it does help, especially in managing the younger generations who perhaps might be valuing this particular value of freedom more so than others. So how do you do it in an organization? I think you go broad to narrow, right? So first thing first is you talk about the idea, right, and see if you get buy-in, right? Not just from the people in the organization, but also from your management, right? If we're talking about giving our people more freedom, right? Are we open for that, right? I mean, we work with manufacturers, right, whose as you can see, quality control and specifications kind of the nature of the work dictate that they cannot be so flexible when it comes to giving people freedom, right? So the organization has to first address the fact that, are we even going to introduce this? And in this case, the answer was yes, because they were losing talent by restricting and hindering their freedom. Then the next step, then get a little bit narrower, as in, okay, then what are we talking about? Freedom to come to work, freedom to operate, freedom to make choices, freedom to manage the people, right? There are different ways that you can carve out a niche where you can exercise freedom in the organization and leave certain things untouched, right? And then the narrowest, of course, would be something like we're talking about today, which is equipping your managers with some tools, maybe similarly to what we talked about today, so that they can begin to bring into practice, start to walk the talk of the organization when it comes to freedom.
Yep, fair enough. And interestingly, we've also got a question that says, okay, well, what happens when we drop back a zone, and what steps can we take?
Ooh, okay, interesting. Okay, so let me see if I can. Okay, well, drop back a zone meaning that, let's say you go from zone 3 to zone 2, you drop down.
Yep.
Yeah, the short answer is, Monty, is as I think, first of all, you want to stay in the green. Okay, the flag should be going up when you, it's not so much you drop down a zone, but when you go outside the green, right, that means that you're creating either mistrust or you're giving people too much freedom, right? You want to take mitigation steps to address that. You want to have conversations. You want to perhaps even some slap on the wrist to make sure that people know what is expected, at least from a values and purpose point of view. But as far as dropping within the green zone, sure. I mean, you can get people who go from full delegation back down, right? Because remember that the values and purpose evolve also, right? Like, for example, Iclif has just recently merged and integrated with the Asia School of Business, right? So our culture is evolving, right? So people who used to be in zone 3 now may have dropped down because the alignment had shifted, right? Because the values and purpose that we work with now is a bit different, right? Because of the integration, right? So as long as you stay in the green, I think you can manage within that. Just be mindful that when you get out of the green, that's when problems usually occur.
Yeah, and speaking of problems going out from the green, we've had a question here saying, asking about the separation zone. You know, other than starting to have conversations with Robert Walters, but you know, there's a question here: how do we deal with those in separation? I mean, does it mean that they're fired, or you know, what does that mean to get somebody out of the separation? Or how do we get somebody out of the separation zone? And there's multiple questions around this. So I'm starting to see a commonality here, that you know, there are cases where we have employees in the separation zone that we feel actually, you know, what can we do to get them out of there?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And this one, I'm kind of smiling in the background here also, because I have a personal experience with this as well. You know, the short answer first is that's why I think tools like what we've covered today is incredibly useful, right? Because it allows us a visual, right? It allows us a language. It allows us a map that we can begin to navigate around, right? So when I say personally, I mean, I was in a situation where with a particular colleague, right? We were, you know, it was getting close to that separation zone where I was just to simply write it off and say like, hey, this is a person that I'm trying to avoid at work, and hopefully he or she would disappear soon enough before I'm gone. But once I know that, once I can begin to work on this, I can see the visualization that we're on that edge, right, between, you know, zone 1 and zone 6. And I can see now that I can begin to focus on the green circles of where alignments are happening, right? And ignoring or kind of overlooking downplaying the landmines, right? Stop stepping on them, right? And kind of steer away from the landmines. And, you know, incredibly, I was able to move myself, at least move our relationship up that green band to the point where now I can say that we're both in zone 3, which is the upper rightmost corner, where we trust each other's decision, right? Well, instead of having to walk through every line, we can actually say that, okay, well, I'm good with your way of thinking. Just proceed. Let me know if you need any support. Okay. So I think that's why the tools is incredibly useful, because otherwise the separation is still going to be there, right? Just because the fact that you don't talk about it doesn't mean that it isn't there. And if you don't call it out, if you don't visualize it and talk about it, chances are we're probably going to move more towards separation as opposed to more towards recovery.
Okay, no, that's a good point. Dr. Sam, we're probably gonna answer maybe a couple more questions. There are quite a few coming in, and again, just based on some common topics that's coming around trust. So again, big statement here. But what seems to be coming out is, you know, to gain trust and freedom. I think so. Somebody mentioned here that it takes time. How long might it take to gain that trust and freedom from employers, from the company?
Well, I think if you're speaking from an employee perspective, okay, meaning that somebody who works for an organization, right, then the answer is how well can you align yourselves to the values and purpose of the organization. Okay, now, this may not necessarily, it doesn't dictate that you have to align 100%, right? But I would say that for you to succeed in every sense, right? You know, succeed here also meaning that you're happy working. Right? You want to work for an organization that you can at least have a 50%, I would hope, right? Agreement with their core values and its purpose in what it's trying to do. So the sooner you learn what those are, the sooner you can act incongruent with that, and less you step on the landmines, kind of James case, then the quicker you're going to be climbing that green ladder, if you will. Okay. And by the same token, if you flip it around and say that if you're trying to get trust from your people, then you want to make sure that they know that this is what's expected of them, right? That here are our values, here are our purpose, and to a certain degree, you know, I'd like to talk to you about how aligned you are to those, and we expect you to behave, you know, with a significant degree of alignment.
Okay.
Yep.
And then now last question. Again, sorry everybody if we're not able to go through everyone's questions. It's coming in quite quickly. But this last one, Dr. Sand, and there's some overlying topic here around empowerment. So now if I have an employee who I've empowered and given autonomy to, and it's gone backwards, does that mean I'm not managing this right, as the outcomes are not being achieved?
Yeah, this is a great question. Okay, and I just want to take this also as an opportunity to remind us that, you know, today we're talking about alignment of values and purpose, right? But it is not the be all and end all, right? There are other elements that come into when you're delegating as well, right? So, for example, I'm sure most of us, if not many, have used of things like situational leadership, right? Where you look at the element of competency or skill versus willingness, okay? So it used to be taught that if the person shows skill and the person shows willingness, then you can delegate. That's what situational leadership would tell us. Okay? What this does is it brings an additional lens that, well, perhaps in the open source era that we live now, right, with the digitalization of workplace that may or may not go back after COVID-19, perhaps we need additional lens as well, because just because your person knows how to do the work and wants to do the work doesn't mean that they're always going to make the best decision, right? You know, some of the worst decisions in corporate leadership had been made by the people who are the most skilled and the most willing, right, for success. So to the question on if you're having problem with delegation, right, I would say that you have to put on this different lens to look at, is the problem coming from the person not aligning to values and purpose, right? i.e. somebody in zone 4 that we talked about earlier, too much freedom, right? Or perhaps you could have somebody in zone 3, right, which is, you know, they are aligned with values and purpose, but they're still creating problems, right? This one, you may have to go back to situational leadership and think that, well, maybe they're having problems not because their heart isn't in the right place, but because maybe perhaps their head and their hands is not. Meaning that maybe they lack a certain skill that you're not aware of, or they lack a certain willingness, right? So I think this is used as a supplementation to the already existing lens that we can use to look at how do we give people more freedom, or i.e. Delegation.
Great. Wow, Dr. Tan, I think you're giving a lot of things for people to think about, myself included. So that was very, very insightful. So again, everyone, I do apologize that we were not able to answer everyone's questions. However, you feel free to reach out to Dr. Tan or myself should you have anything else pending. So that does take us to the end of today's webinar. But fear not. Now, if you would like to hear more about this topic, there will be a continuation of this topic tomorrow between Dr. Tan and myself. Now, tomorrow's format is going to be a little different. This is more around a discussion style. So we're going to talk about the application of this framework that Dr. Tan has just shared, and discuss some challenges that we may face with this. So as you can see on the slide, feel free to register. It's happening tomorrow at 3 p.m. Malaysia, Singapore, Philippines time. So yeah, so that session is happening tomorrow afternoon. So once again, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for attending today's webinar. And of course, a huge thank you, Dr. Tan, for sharing this very insightful presentation. And that, ladies and gentlemen, takes us to the end of the webinar. In the meantime, please stay safe. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Monty. Thank you, everyone.